Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to discuss the full moon or Purnima that's happening on the 13th of January 2025. And this is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective, so ancient Indian astrology that's more than 5,000 years old. And it seemed like the theme for this moment in time is recovering home within. So let's take a look. Note beforehand the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. Then you might take a minute or two to read the rest of this disclaimer. If you're new to Vedic astrology, Jyotish are my videos. All my teaching videos on the subject are my concepts playlist. They can be found there. Wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject if you'd like to learn more. Also, I'm pretty good at organizing my videos into different playlists. So the different topic areas, the videos in different topic areas are easy to find. So, like, I have a planets grahas playlist, a houses bhavas playlist, a yoga's planetary combinations playlist, and others. Yeah, so those are out there. Also, if you like to learn astrology by looking at famous birth charts, if you check out my birth chart archive list 2024 video, I have a list of all the famous birth charts I've analyzed on the channel, whether it's famous people, places, or moments in time. So you can check that out for more info. Also, if you're looking to get an overview of the first 6 months of the year 2025, I would look at my December solstice 2024 to June solstice 2025 video to get more information about that. So other videos to watch with this one to get more out of this talk, because it is an interpretation talk, and so I incorporate a lot of different concepts. North, South, and East Indian style charts. I do cover Western style charts in that video as well. Introduction to navigating a birth chart. Lugna, also known as the ascendant, rising sign, or first house. Introduction to the constellations of rashis, constellation of rashi categories. Planetary aspects, natural, benefic, and malefic planets or grahas. Bhavat, bhavam, house of the house concept. Chidra grahas are planets of vulnerability. Planet exaltation, debilitation, or uccha, nicca. Swagrahas are planets in their own sign or star. Planet retrogression or vakri. Nakshatras are lunar mansions, and then we have some yogas. So parivartana yoga, exchange of houses, lunar yogas, and then budhaditya yoga, the intelligence combination. So, yep, plenty to learn if you're up for it. Okay, so here's the chart for this particular moment in time of the full moon on 13th January 2025. This chart is set for 17:26 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's the time zone that I live in. So if we get some context here before we go in house by house, the day lord is a moon, and the hora lord or hour lord is Mars. Okay, so that already tells us a lot because you can see moon is in the 12th house here. 12th house is up in the upper right corner. Okay, and the thing is, what we have here is we have a Cancer rising chart. So if you're not familiar, this is a North Indian style chart. And the top diamond in the middle is considered to be the first house, rising sign, ascendant, or lugna, all different names for the same thing. Okay. And that 4 in the bottom corner, that represents the fourth zodiac sign of Cancer or Karka in Sanskrit. Okay, so we have a Cancer rising chart. So it's already directing us right to the top here. The first house and the 12th house. Okay. And potentially the 6th house as well, since the moon is aspecting to the 6th house. Then the Hera Lord, the Hour Lord is Mars, and Mars is right at the top as well. Mars is underlined under Mars means that it's retrograde. So we have a retrograde Mars here as well. So just already from that, since the ruling planet of Cancer is the moon, and it's gone to the 12th house of losses, expenditures, foreign places, that sort of thing. It looks like there's been some loss here of some kind. And the moon represents things like emotions, intuition, mother. And because the moon represents, the ruling planet for the chart, it might even be, since the first house represents the self, it might even be sort of a loss of self, kind of a loss of finding one's way. Okay. And the moon, you can see, is in the very last degree of Gemini here. It's at 29 degrees, 46 minutes. So when we have a planet in the first or last degree of any sign, we call that Sundi. And Sundi basically indicates that there's instability. Okay. Um, and because we're changing signs, and the signs have different elements associated with it. So Moon is shifting from Gemini, which is an air sign, to Cancer, which is a water sign. So air representing ideas and thoughts, to water, emotions. Okay, so already we have quite a bit of instability here, since that's the ruling planet. The other thing that's interesting is that the moon happens to be in a nakshatra or lunar mansion called Punarvasu. So if you're not familiar, there are 27 lunar mansions, and each night the moon travels through a different one. They all have different energies associated with them. So after 27 nights, the moon essentially creates a lunar month. Okay. So the moon, as a planet, represents things like emotions, intuition, feelings, like the sensory mind, the intuitive mind. Um, it also represents the public. It represents mother. It represents nurturance, like nurturing and that sort of thing, like a motherly type quality. It can represent mothers as well. It also represents things like food and diet. Again, things that nurture. It also represents fluids. So there could also even be like literally a loss of fluids here for some people. Okay. So what's interesting, the reason why I said that's interesting is that that's what the moon represents, but then the nakshatra that it's in is Punarvasu. Okay. And Punarvasu is symbolized by a quiver of arrows. So that box that you hang on your back, I guess, with the arrows in it, and you pull the arrows out and sling them on your bow and then shoot them off. So the energy of Punarvasu is about having a home base, like that quiver on the back, that the arrows kind of keep recycling through. Okay, so having a home base, going out, arrows going out and coming back. And again, moon represents home. Okay. It also represents self in this particular chart. Okay. So there is this notion of home with both the planet and the nakshatra, but then there's also this sort of like sharp quality associated with Punarvasi, because you have that sharp, bit on the arrow. And it's also, a weapon. So there is a sort of like protection quality. So we can already see like protection, of home, protection of self, protection of, um, emotions, that sort of thing. Mother maybe too is, and there's some losses associated with that. But there is just through that, there's like also this duality of this sort of comforting, nurturing, emotional side to the fighting part. Mhm. And then that's also essentially also recreated with Mars, because Mars is in Cancer. Cancer is ruled by the moon, and Cancer is a movable water sign. So a lot of emotions, like churning of emotions and stuff like that. Actually, I just the last video I posted before this one is a whole video on Cancer. So if you want to, Karka Rashi, if you want to look at that to get a full view of Cancer. But so Mars is a fighting planet. It's a fiery planet. It's an innovative planet. It's a pioneering planet. It's a rebellious planet. That sort of thing. And Mars being retrograde, that'll give some strength, but also usually that's associated with reviewing things. And Mars is the action planet, so it could be like reviewing actions here, which is potentially stirring up emotions. Or it could be like a variation of that, like reviewing actions that have stirred up emotions. Okay. And Mars is in also the nakshatra of Punarvasu. So now we have Mars, which is in action, and it can be like an aggressive planet as well in that Punarvasu nakshatra that the moon is also in. So we have this nurturance side as well as this fighting side, more of the fighting energy. And then again, to add more duality to it, is that the rising sign, Lagna nakshatra, is in Pushya. Pushya is symbolized by a cow's udder. So, in India, they revere cows because part of the reason is that because the cow is so generous by offering its milk to, non-cows, right, us humans, and it's sort of adopting us, other species than its own. It's considered to be a very generous and stabilizing, both physically and emotionally. Like milk, even like if you ever get into Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, milk is considered to be a very high sattvic kind of food, a very like spiritual food, but also like very nourishing for the nervous system, especially. And it's one of the foods like again in Ayurveda, there are these kind of different levels of tissues, and to get to the deepest seventh layer typically takes about 40 days or so, because it's like a cascade, a waterfall. One tissue kind of nourishes itself, and then if there's any extra nutrition, it nourishes the next level, and so on and so on. But milk can potentially go to that deepest level within a day. Okay, so there's something like, again, there's something even through Ayurveda, something very important and special about milk is um, like a symbolic, but also literally a physical way to nourish like the nervous system very quickly. Yeah. So again, we're with both the rising sign and the rising sign Lord Moon, we're getting a lot of this dual energy of fighting and nurturing. Okay, and because the moon, sorry, Mars is in Cancer, Mars is actually debilitated in Cancer. So this Mars is not, Mars tends to be an erotic planet because it doesn't have the most straight kind of path in the sky. Um, so that in and of itself, Mars has that quality, but then now it's destabilized or debilitated. So we're going to even have more of this like erratic energy of, do I fight? Do I nurture? And then, again, Cancer, not just the moon represents home, but Cancer represents home and places of nourishment and stability. Like, for example, hotels and restaurants, that sort of thing. Cancer also represents bodies of water, but specifically bodies of water that have like boundaries. So, like a river with two edges, or like a pool with four edges, or like a plumbing pipe, because it's, again, boundaries of the pipe with the water going through, that sort of, or an aquarium, with the edges of the glass and the usually fish or something and the water inside. Um, so yeah, so there's this like already between the day lord, hour lord, and the two plants we're looking at like reviewing our actions in terms of what has produced emotional stability, emotional nurturance, or not. Um, and then there's this like kind of kind of a fighting energy potentially. This might be a bit of, it's not always comfortable or easy to dive deep within oneself and deep within one's emotions to really get at the root cause of why, something or some thought or feeling we have, is presenting itself, and what part of our life perhaps is not working as well as we'd like it to, or in a certain way. Okay. So, yeah, okay. So we've got that. So we've got traveling energy, emotional loss energy, but also this like duality of nurturing and fighting. It's almost like what are we fighting for? What should we fight for? Okay. Okay, so the Dasha period is the planetary period. And at this particular moment, it's Jupiter, Moon, Jupiter. So we're picking up more of this moon energy. And now we're, bringing in Jupiter into the mix. So Jupiter is also retrograde. Jupiter happens to be 11th house of clubs, group societies, but also income. Jupiter represents things like spirituality and optimism. And between the two of these, Jupiter and Moon, both of them represent intuition. So this could be quite an intuitive, this might be an intuitively led process here. Maybe not one that, consciously sort of, decided upon, but maybe just, the intuition's knocking on the door of consciousness, and it's like, okay, it's really time to take a look at this, right? So the other thing is Jupiter is, as I mentioned several times, I always kind of think of Jupiter as like Santa Claus, like generous and giving out gifts and jolly and happy and um, you know um, supporting children. Jupiter represents children. It's also a spiritual planet. It also represents things like finance and things like that. So it seems pretty good. Jupiter's in the 11th house. The 11th house represents things like it's a kamastana, it's a house of enjoyment. So this could potentially be, um, quite a bit of enjoyment. Um, but there's issues here. So, but before we get to the issues, Jupiter, let's just finish Jupiter off first. So Jupiter is in a nakshatra called Rohini. Rohini is this like is the nakshatra that's considered to be the most attractive and luscious and fertile and sort of attractive, seductive, even. Yeah. So that sounds pretty good, but it's like it's almost like all that glitters may not, be gold type of situation here because that sounds pretty good. But then if we look at the dispositor, the ruler, the ruling planet for the 11th house, that's Venus. And Venus is also like a natural benefic like Jupiter is. Venus represents, the finer things in life and socializing and, fine food and travel and enjoyment and parties. And that all sounds pretty good. However, Venus has gone to the eighth house of deep psychology, but also chronic long-term problems. Okay. And it's there with Saturn. Okay. So Venus is in a nakshatra called Shatabisha. Shatabisha is translated as 100 healers. So typically, when planets are in Shatabisha, it can indicate problems related to the planet that are difficult to heal, hard to diagnose, first of all, hard to heal, hard to address, hard to ameliorate. And especially with Venus going to the eighth house of chronic problems and sometimes endings up, like really deep long term obstacles. It looks like even though there's this, very positive planet and a positive nakshatra, that there's this sort of drain that's happening from the 11th house of, again, clubs, group, society, so socializing, but also, income potentially. And then on top of that, a Venus is with a swa Saturn. So swa means Saturn is in its own sign or star. So Saturn is in its own sign of Aquarius, which is a fixed air sign. So fixed air sign can be like kind of ideas that don't change very much. Okay. And Saturn is in a nakshatra called Purva, which is pretty intense because Saturn is a planet that represents things like obstacles, delays, skepticism, doubts, anxiety, depression. And that's very strong on the eighth house here. Okay. And so this massive Saturn, all of that slowness and delays and obstacles is really putting a damper on Venus, which is again the lord of the 11th house here. Okay. It also, Venus is also lord of the fourth house. So the fourth house is also a comma. No, it's not. Sorry. The fourth house is also a house that represents home, family lineage. It also represents like happiness. Okay, so the ruling planet for that house is, in the eighth house with this massive Saturn that's in Purva Bhadrapada. And Purva Bhadrapada nakshatra is symbolized by the front legs of a funeral pyre. So a lot of destructive energy here. I mean, you can just, imagine a cremation burial type of thing, like flames and smoke, and part of it too is about like release. So it seems like there's very strong negative, especially because the eighth house also represents, deep psychology. This is somebody who potentially could be like chronically depressed. Okay. The other thing is that, I mean, if we're looking at this as a chart for a particular person, okay. The other thing, it's like there's a drain from the fourth house of happiness. There's a drain from the, 11th house of socializing and income and, just enjoyment. It's a common stuff, right? Um, luckily, though, if we're, probably, well, not lucky, but maybe more optimistically, if we're looking at this chart as more of a like a transit chart, Saturn is going to be switching out of Aquarius in a couple months at the end of March. So then Saturn will not be quite so strong, and there will be not quite so much drain or like suppression of Venusian energy. And then there'll be less of a drain on the fourth house matters, home, also education, mother potentially, happiness, and the 11th house. Okay. So it's kind of good that I've already started talking about Saturn because once the next sort of big planetary period to Dasha period switch is going to be to from Jupiter to Jupiter Moon Saturn, 13th of March 2025. Now, I thought that timing was interesting because it brings focus to Saturn and how again that's again in this chart a really big drain on the whole system. Okay. So, and that's about the time, it's a little bit before the time that Saturn is moving out of here. Okay. So if we look at the Jupiter period, this could potentially be like help or charity from others. And then with the Saturn here again, when we move into that period, this is potentially like support or overcoming a loss of the things that I've been mentioning, the emotional losses, you know, um, um, and the loss of self potentially even. Okay. So, at the time of this recording, I live in the United States and in Los Angeles, there's a lot of fires going on. And so I was thinking that this could um, actually represent that experience that a lot of people are going through. Like literally, if Moon was the ruling planet of the chart and Moon's gone to the 12th house of losses, and this Mars energy is at the top, but Mars is also aspecting the fourth house of home and happiness and lineage. This could literally be somebody losing their home, physical home. Okay. The other thing, I'll get to that a little bit more, but the day after this is the day when the Kumbh Mela is scheduled to start in India. If you haven't heard of that, it's a pilgrimage that's scheduled about every 12 years. And that schedule is based on the position of Jupiter, which we've been talking about, spiritual planet, in relationship to the sun and the moon, and that only happens every 12 years. So that's not a typical phenomenon, but I thought it was interesting because again, when we're talking about the Kumbh Mela, it's like in some ways, it's like a conscious or chosen displacement from home, leaving behind things, the comforts of home, the normal schedule, and then going to a river, which we've been talking about Cancer. So again, a body of water with boundaries, specific boundaries, um, and then doing like bathing in the rivers, so like a release of old thoughts, of old deeds, of old karma, you know. So you can pick up, in either situation that this Mars Moon situation we've been talking about with Saturn, like draining the kind of energy of the chart, could be in both cases. Like whether it's a kind of forced, more externally driven event, or whether it's a consciously chosen um, event to release things. Because there's usually also like donations that are given, and there's another kind of holiday right around this time called Pongal, where people will clean out their homes, get rid of things, donate things to people. Um, and then also with the Pongal, I thought it was funny, like or just maybe an interesting coincidence, or not coincidence, where they have this, I guess, a tradition of boiling milk with rice and jaggery, so a sweetener, and then they overboil it so the milk spills over and burns. And that's supposed to be a symbol of like abundance and things like that. And that's literally like what you could see here. Like the moon in the 12th house is a loss of fluids. And usually moon is related to like white flowers and white things like white liquids like milk. So loss of milk and then through burning would be this like erratic Mars, you know. So I thought that was very interesting. So it just seemed like there's a much deeper kind of um, almost message coming through here about home. And again, with the LA fires, people are losing their homes and a lot of their, if not all of their possessions, physical, tangible possessions. And people going on this Kumbh Mela are like traveling long distances and leaving, comforts of their home and then, friends and family, temporarily and by choice, and then making donations and then cleaning out their homes. But um, I think both situations have the potential to lead someone to really focusing on the home within. And that's part of why it seemed like that was the theme for this moment in time. Is it's like regardless of the external world, like what's happening or not happening or what you have or you don't have, it's how do we really clean up and nurture and find, develop that home within ourselves, almost like a turtle. That's like I was thinking of a turtle, like, the turtles like carry their home everywhere they go. And so there's this kind of, stability within, so to speak, with turtles. So it's like, how do we become more like that? Where we're not like potentially swayed or influenced or seduced by external things and tangible things, yeah, and more comfortable within our own bodies, within our own minds, within our own hearts. So also about this time on a sort of I guess my other thing that I do, I work with patients medically, and I had a patient who came in this week. And this chart also reminded me of my patient because he brought up that he has this tendency to hoard things, like mostly books and some other things. And he's kind of impulsive with his purchasing and things like that. And so, he brought it up. And what else does he do? Oh, and he also has a tendency to overeat. So again, this would be this erratic Mars in the fourth house of Cancer, or not the fourth, but in the fourth constellation of Cancer. That could be the erratic activities, because Mars again, it's going to be less controllable. Like actions are less controllable when Mars is in this position. And there's this dual nature of like Pushya and then Punarvasu and then nurturing and fighting, that sort of thing. So he brings this up, and I asked him. I said, "Well, do you understand or have you ever looked at why you hoard? Like rather than try to stop the behavior, it's like have you ever tried to like sit and just you have this impulse to hoard or buy something or whatever. And if instead of, pushing the buy button on your cart on the on the internet or whatever, if you sit there and say like, what is this really doing for me? Like what is the real itch I'm trying to scratch with this behavior? What's underneath, what's really driving this behavior underneath? And then what popped up with him is like, well, most of the time I'm actually pretty miserable. So I said, well, I think that's what you really kind of need to look at, rather than just the behavior, because behavior is just sort of an external mechanism for some internal restlessness, some internal disease. So we started with that. So, but it just on that, on a more personal level, like it's like um, there was this sort of like starting to get clear, starting to see the emotional losses and the erratic behaviors that are potentially covering up or fogging up the lens of what those emotional losses are. Usually when we have, and we all have them, right? Like we all have something that we numb out with, like too much sugar, too much internet, too much shopping, too much, whatever, drinking, whatever it is. Um, and it's, I always ask the question like, you know, why? Like, what is it doing? Like, why do they need this Band-Aid? Why do they, because it's all self-medication, right? I mean, there's something that's unpleasant and disturbing that probably wants to come to the surface, but a lot of people, don't have real strong skill set in terms of like being with these different emotions and things like that. Like, how do you unpack that? What do you do with them? Like, do we just sit there with, this endless pit of sadness or depression or anger or disappointment or, it could be anything, right? So but I think that's the true work here, right? So again, whether, it's the people in LA with their homes being burned or the people consciously going on this journey, with the Kumbh Mela or this particular, patient I mentioned who's starting to get a little more starting to look at it, and my advice to him was just like, because he does some mindfulness practices and some journaling and stuff. And I said, what if you just get curious rather than try to control it, just sort of friend it in a way, like get curious, like why do I need this, again, hoarding behavior or whatever. So it seems like this chart is representing this notion of how do we get more comfortable deep within ourselves, within our own skin, within our own consciousness, within our own minds and hearts, and develop a true home that will be with us every minute, no matter where we are or what's going on around us. So yeah, okay. So then the Lagna nakshatra I mentioned is Pushya, looking for emotional stability here. Some drive towards emotional stability, but again, contrasting with the Punarvasu of having a home base, going out and coming back, right? And even that Punarvasu was kind of like this guy talking about, like, like the like the quiver of arrows. I was just thinking of like his body or his heart, and then the hoarding energy, hoarding behavior takes him away from himself, and he goes back home, and then it's like the cycling energy also, right? It's like how do you potentially get out of cycles that some cycles work pretty well, and some cycles, are outlived or destructive in some ways. So yeah. Then the moon nakshatra I mentioned Punarvasu, so there can be, I think, an emotional sting here because again that sharpness, and so there might be some, again, there's probably some discomfort here, frankly, with uncovering all this and also traveling from home. So the other thing, though, is that, again, some, I think, good news here with this chart. So far, it's pretty heavy. It feels pretty heavy to me. And again, just looking at it right away, like I knew it was going to be a heavy chart. But within about 24 minutes, yeah, so within 24 minutes, the moon is shifting from the 12th house of losses to its own sign of Cancer. And that's going to bring strength to the chart and to the native. It's going to make, it's going to take another day or so for moon to get out of Punarvasu to get into Pushya, but it will shift from this Punarvasu energy to this Pushya energy in a very short amount of time. The other thing is sun is also Sunday. It's at 29 degrees 47 minutes. It's in Sagittarius. So Sagittarius is a dual fire sign, and the sun is a fire sign. So there's a lot of activity going on here in the sixth house of enemies, but also daily routines. Okay, so the sun is going to be shifting signs into Capricorn within a day of this chart as well. So that also is helpful because you can see in this chart, the other reason why I knew, immediately this chart was going to be a bit of trouble was that you have 6 planets out of the 9 classical Jyotish planets in negative houses. You have Ketu, Mercury, Sun, Venus, Saturn, Moon. 6 out of 9 planets. So, that's a Balarishta yoga. We call it Balarishta yoga. So it's an indication, like if this was somebody's birth chart, this would be an indication that they had difficulties in childhood on some level. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's mental, emotional. Sometimes it's so severe that they don't survive childhood or they don't live past like, the early 20s, like they end up passing away pretty early. So again, this is a pretty precarious time, but within a day, if moon shifts into Cancer and sun shifts into Capricorn, we're going from 6 planets in negative houses to 4. That's already a big improvement. So I'm hoping, excuse me, but that's an indication that things may potentially improve fairly quickly. Although we still have this Saturn to deal with. But when we have Moon going into its own sign of Cancer, that'll bring strength and intuition. With Sun moving into Capricorn, and Mars is exalted in Capricorn, so you're going to have two fire planets, two leadership planets in Capricorn. That's going to be about building. So you're going to have Moon, Mars, Sun, and Jupiter all aspecting the seventh house of independent business, relationships, but also one's way through life, the way that they journey through life, their life path. So that's going to be a lot stronger and a lot more activity, um, within a short amount of time of this. Chart. Okay. The other thing is within a week of the chart, Mars will no longer be debilitated because Mars will shift into Gemini. So that's another, again, within a short amount of time, the energy is going to be changing here. And then I mentioned again the Indian holidays, religious holidays of Pongal, of, again, abundance and clearing things out of the home, and uh, uh, nurturing and stuff like that, as well as the Kumbh Mela. So again, different ways of honoring Sun and Moon and Jupiter as well. Okay, let's go through house by house. The Lugna again, it's a Cancer Karka rising, Karka Lugna, movable water sign. A lot of emotional energy here, especially with Mars being debilitated. That can be pretty tough. And if you did watch my video on Cancer, you know that there's kind of a reciprocal debilitation that happens in Cancer charts. So um, Mars is debilitated in Cancer, which is ruled by the Moon, and Moon is debilitated in Scorpio, which is ruled by Mars. And so in a Cancer rising chart, Cancer Lugna, Karka Lugna, Mars in this chart is debilitated in the Lugna. That's going to bring instability to the whole chart. And Moon is not in Scorpio, but Moon is in the 12th house and in Sunday. So again, the first house of self, concept of self, even, and like um, supporting self, fighting self, that sort of thing, is unstable. And then the Moon is going to be drawing attention to the instability of the fifth house of intellect and top of the mind stuff. Yeah. So okay. Let's see. So we have a retrograde debilitated Mars and Punarvasu we've been talking about. So this is about reviewing actions, intermittent attempts to establish emotional stability, fighting, traveling from home. We discussed that. Lugnatia full, it's full moon. It's Sunday though, and Punarvasu in the 12th house, which is a moksha sthana. So this moon, ruling planet for the chart, has gone to a house of liberation. So, somebody's looking to get away from this, I think, contradiction here. These dual energies. I mean, this is pretty intense instability here. So, if this is a person's chart, this would potentially be somebody who's quite introverted and, when they're not feeling well, will kind of go off, on their own or potentially go on retreat. It may also be somebody who literally travels far away from home, like maybe lives abroad, since it looks like a lot of instability with family and home, because we do have Venus, which is the lord of the fourth house of home and family and mother, and we have a debilitated Mars aspect in the fourth house. But then we have this Venus-Saturn combination, pretty heavy combination aspect in the second house of family inner circle as well. So, yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, so this moon in the 12th house, traveling to a remote place from home, losses incurred by self. Like this might be regrets, frankly, of actions that were maybe more impulsive rather than, thought through. This could also be charitable giving, nurturing others in foreign places or faraway places, nurturing the public. And this moon is aspected by Mercury, which is the other mind planet. And but the Mercury is more the rational, analytical mind. And Mercury is in Purvashada nakshatra, which is a sorting energy. So the mind is sorting again, like the actions are being sorted. The mind is also sorting through like these emotional losses, like how can we recover and do from the past and do better moving forward. And then the sun there, luckily sun is an Uttara nakshatra, which is about a sudden piercing victory. So again, even within a day, sun moving into a Capricorn, it's still going to be an Uttara. So I think that's going to bring some, clarity and direction and energy moving forward instead of feeling like somebody might, in this particular configuration, feel like they're languishing a bit. So yes, all the sorting through thoughts, emotions, decisions, and retreat, review of soul purpose. The sun represents soul and purpose, but potentially even career as well. Potentially father, government authority, boss. We have a bunch of different yogas in this chart. So we have a budhaditya yoga, that's Mercury and Sun together in the same sign, and that is qualified because Sun owns the second house. So that brings an intelligence combination, especially regarding like math and science type stuff. We also have a dhuradara lunar yoga. So the moon is supported by two true planets in the second house and 12th house from it. So that'll support the moon, what the moon's going through. And we have that Balarishta yoga that I mentioned. So there's intelligence and some support, but again, with the Balarishta, that seems to be the strongest one here. Fragile beginning, childhood difficulties. And if we look at the chidra grahas, which are planets of vulnerability, so kind of sensitive spots or, spots that somebody may have kind of chronic issues with, we have Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury twice over. So these are two opposing energies here is Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter's the great benefic. It represents optimism, happiness, joy. And Saturn is the opposite, skepticism, doubt, anxiety, fear, um, depression. And then Mercury is the rational, analytical mind. And that's a double chidra. So again, the decisions, right? The way that somebody's processing this, or maybe not, that may be the other thing is maybe they're not processing it. Because again, we have the two mind planets in negative houses. Moon is in the 12th house, Mercury's in the 6th house. And the two emotional planets, Moon is in the 12th house, Venus is in the 8th house. So mind and emotions, really not, in a good place here. Um, yeah, so I think with this Jupiter and Saturn, it's like how the Jupiter's trying to lift things up, but the Saturn's just such a drag, being so strong in the 8th house here. It's like, overcoming destructive mental patterns and habits is what I was saying here. Yeah, trying to at least, yeah. Then we have some kind of money stuff, money planets here. So we have the Yogi, which is a Jupiter. So again, wealth. So again, Jupiter's trying to give what Jupiter can give, but there's still this like drain here on the system. The Aviyogi's sun. So that can indicate a planet that's not bringing wealth. And duplicate Yogi's moon. So that sounds kind of funny. So there should be some, wealth because the moon is lord of the first house. The moon is also in the 12th. So there is some loss, like, and the moon is in the 12th house, but also aspect in the 6th house of acute issues. So acute financial troubles and losses since we're in the moon sub period here. There's potential, like we were running Jupiter, but again, this drain through Venus, which is with this really strong Saturn, is draining what Jupiter can give. And that's something important, like as we go through the rest of the charts, but also the subcharts, the options, subdivisional charts, all different names for the same thing. That was something that I kept picking up is that Saturn keeps draining both Jupiter and the moon. So that's not insignificant. All right, so let's see. Okay, so let's take a look at the other houses. So the second house, the Lord is a Sunday sun, and then is affected by Venus, which is in Shatabisha, and a Swa, very strong Saturn and Purva. So this could be loss of home and community, also harsh news or speech, troubles with family, inner circle, also assets as well. Again, instability and destruction. So that's a pretty hardcore energy there. Third house lord is Mercury, and we've got Ketu there, which is a pretty erratic, destructive planet. Can be in Uttara Phalguni, which is symbolized by hammock, and the energy there is about enjoyment, but with a purpose. And this is in the third house, which is a Kamastan, another enjoyment, house. So, and then that's aspected by this retrograde Jupiter and Rohini. So this is like sorting energy through siblings, neighbors, friends. That's the third house stuff. But also there's this generous and kind energy. So this might be like intentionally releasing goods, to support others. Like I was hearing some of the with the fires going on in LA, a lot of celebrities are being affected by that, and so some of the celebrities are going online and saying, I'm bringing my whole closet to places, charity places where people can pick up whatever clothes and towels or whatever they can offer to support people, who've lost everything. So, mm, yeah. Then the fourth house lord is Venus, we've been talking about, and it's aspected by a debilitated Mars. And there's trouble at home here, clearly. This would be considered a foo-foo yoga. Yeah, that's a negative house yoga. With the Lord of the fourth house going to a negative house with this massively strong Saturn, and then another malefic, debilitated malefic um, aspect in the fourth house. There's a lot of trouble at home with mom, happiness, also education. This could literally mean displacement from home. Like, again, either unconscious, or not, sort of by way of a natural disaster, the fires in LA, or by choice, right? The Kumbh Mela, right? Yeah, and then again, there's long-term problems here because this dispositor of the fourth house is wrapped up with this pretty strong Saturn. Again, Saturn itself is a planet representing long-term problems, and it's in the eighth house here of long-term problems. So, yeah, it's going to be a deep. It's going to be a long-term recovery here. Um, and this. Yeah, we'll get to it. But then let's see, fifth house lord is the debilitated Mars, and it's aspected by Jupiter and Saturn. So again, the fifth house represents the intellect. It also represents children. So you have this massive Saturn and Purvabhadra on there with Jupiter, and then the Lord is a debilitated Mars. It's clearly some issues with children here. Um, and then also like there's this like again opposing energies. Like we saw these opposing energies of nurture versus fight in the Lugna, which again the first house also represents personality. This fifth house represents the intellect. So we have the great benefic Jupiter and Rohini, at the same time, the influence of Saturn and Purvadra. It's like extreme, it's like planets in themselves are extremely different energies. And now they're in extremely different nakshatra. So it's even more like extreme difference here. And both of these planets are influencing the fifth house of intellect. So you can see that, that alone would create, quite a bit of instability here and confusion, I would say, because it's like, well, right now Jupiter and Moon, we're in that period, but then in a couple months we're moving to June, Jupiter, Moon, Saturn. So literally both of those planets will be active and influential. But again, luckily, again, as a transit, Jupiter is moving out, a couple weeks after this March 13th period. Yeah. So I would see because this extreme position of Jupiter and Saturn, this is gonna be like an internal roller coaster. And we've already seen multiple indications of instability for this particular chart, right? So just more of it, unfortunately. Okay, so then the sixth house lord is Bhavat Bhavam retrograde Jupiter and Rohini. Bhavat Bhavam, the reason why I say that is Jupiter is the lord of the sixth house, and the sixth house lord has gone six houses away. That indicates a multiplicity. So this is like one problem after another. Yeah. So cancers right now, probably. the Cancer or Lugna people probably been feeling like this whole year because Jupiter's been in that position for almost a year now. It's like just one issue after another. I'm sure they're getting tired of that. So, and then let's see, Mercury is there. We mentioned Purvashada, and then the unstable sun, and Uttara. So sorting through one acute issue after another, mental emotional stress because the moon is aspecting there as well. Also family assets, because the sun is the lord of the second house of family assets. But there's also some success here. So again, there's glimmers of hope in this chart. It's not all doom and gloom. There are some things that seem positive despite the intensity of the chart in this moment. Then the seventh house lord is Saturn. So, yeah, that's going to be a drain on the seventh house issues as well. So spouse like partner, independent business, business partnerships, also just again, way in life, path forward in life. There's at least Mars is exalted there, so Mars will act a little bit better, in terms of this area of life, these areas of life. And then we have the retrograde Jupiter. So I think there's some strength here. Um, in the seventh house, even though Jupiter's debilitated, it's still nice that some, benefic energy is coming that way. And then again, once moon and sun change in the next day, energy is going to shift. Okay. So, so there might be a sudden shift in leadership and action towards self and others, pretty quickly. Building relations, independent business, moving forward, more traveling energy because you have the moon and Jupiter there. Um, and nurturance as well, intuition. So this could be like a burst on the scene of leadership, suddenly. And then the eighth house, we've been talking about eighth house lord is a Swa Saturn, Venus is there, aspected by Mars. So when you have Mars and Saturn together, you get this kind of engineering energy. And the thing is, like, Venus is kind of swamped by these energies because Saturn's super strong because it's in its own sign. But Mars is in its debilitation sign. So you have these very strongly opposing malefic energies just drowning Venus and the good things that Venus can give as a natural benefic. So that's pretty tough. And again, all that brings in like constructing, deconstructing relationships, because the seventh lord is Saturn, fourth lord, 11th lord are Venus. Mars is the fifth lord, and the 10th lord. Yeah, so a lot of change of relationships and homes, assets again, social groups. This will bring an alternative mindset, because the lord of the eighth house is strong. So this person's probably open to, other stuff. And then this, I would see difficulty in sexual system, sexual relationships, because you have the libido planet Mars debilitated, and then Venus is just swamped by the Saturn. So it's probably those levels of existence probably not working too well currently. Also, I would say discouraging talk from partner, because again, if we flip this chart upside down and make Capricorn the rising sign for partner, then their ruling planet has gone to the second house of family and income, and not income, but family and assets and that sort of thing. But this massive Saturn in Purvashada, it's affecting the second house for the native as well as the second house for the partner. So there can be a lot of harsh speech or just at least discouraging talk from the partner or between these two, if there's a partner involved. And yeah, and just, again, if we're looking at the deep psychology, there's some, I would say it's more of a bit erratic as well, but also like it runs hot and cold because again, Mars is this like erratic, heat, fiery, passionate planet, and Saturn's just cold and distant, and you know, um, that's going to be trouble. So, again, this is a person more than a transit chart. I think just their instability in and of itself is going to bring instability to the relationships. So yeah. So let's see. Then we have the ninth house. Ninth house Lord is Jupiter. Rahu's there in Uttara Bhadrapada. So again, this is like active release of or by an authority or government, and potentially a move towards religion and spirituality. Uh, yeah. 10th house Lord is this debilitated Mars and is aspected by a debilitated Saturn. I mean, that's a pretty destructive daily actions here. Work, you know, career, reputation, So if we're looking at this as a transit chart, it looks like there's a massive shift going on in this area of life, which should get better, again, once Mars and Saturn switch positions over the next couple months. Yeah, but on the day to day, this looks like somebody who would have a very difficult time holding a 9 to 5 job. And, again, if and when, well, if this is a birth chart and they're starting off in Jupiter, then they're not going to run Rahu. So they're not going to, I think, aim towards like government related positions. Like they probably would try to be an entrepreneur. Let's see, Jupiter and then Saturn. And it's going to be difficult too, because again, this person's running Jupiter, but then after Jupiter comes Saturn, and that's when that deep, like if this is a person, they probably would experience pretty severe depression early to mid, early, whatever, late teen. I don't know how far we're in, like late teenage years to 20s. That period of time, which is pretty important time because that's when people are like potentially putting themselves out in the world and making decisions about themselves and also creating like based on how they're progressing or not, that can affect their self-esteem and their self-identity. Like, um, yeah. So, um, in the 11th house lord is Venus, and they've got the retrograde Jupiter. So there is a loss of attractive income, social connections here. So again, like I'm thinking about the LA fires and stuff like that. The 12th house lord is Mercury. It does aspect its own. That'll bring some strength and prevent some, loss of intangible goods. Again, a lot of these celebrities, I mean, they've lost everything, but probably a lot of them, have insurance as well. So they won't, the sentimental items they won't get back, but at least they'll be able to more likely rebuild. And then the other thing is like the insurance commissioner for California um, said that no policies will be canceled this year. So again, that's some saving grace here in terms of not a complete loss of everything, including insurance, right? But we do have a Sunday sun, Sunday moon. So sorting through ideas, feelings, insights, reorienting towards a successful soul path and career and purpose. Yeah, so it's a lot, it's pretty intense. But let's get into the subcharts here and see what we see. So, okay. So if you're not familiar, I'm going to go through the subzodiacs, amshas, subdivisional charts, all different names for the same thing. And these are derived by slicing and dicing the main native chart into smaller pieces, essentially. And what these are mostly used for are timing. So, like when somebody's shifting, like I mentioned, the Dasha period for this moment in time is Jupiter, Moon, Jupiter, and then shifting to Jupiter, Moon, Saturn on the 13th of March. What we would be looking for as astrologers, Vedic astrologers, is the current planetary period planets, like, are they well placed? Are they strong? Because that will indicate like better outcome, better results for that planetary period. Or are they in negative houses and challenged by malefics and different configurations and things like that? In which case, when people are running those planets, things might get worse. Or maybe they're running the worst planets and then it's clearly getting better. It can go either way. And sometimes it's like a mixed bag. Some areas of life will get better, some areas of life will get worse. but it's mostly used for timing. It will also give some information, kind of more nuance or detail, but you've always got to bring the information from the amshas back to the native chart and integrate it together. Okay, these aren't generally read on their own. So yeah, so just to remind, the Dasha period starting out is Jupiter, Moon, Jupiter, and switching to Jupiter, Moon, Saturn on 13th March 2025. So on this slide, we have relationships. So Navamsha D9 for spouse and partnerships, and the Drake and a D3 for siblings. So in the first chart, Saturn's not well placed and it's debilitated. Okay, in the eighth house. So that's not looking too good. And like as I mentioned, the spouse, the seventh house looked pretty challenged, and we're already, I think, seeing that for the partner here. And again, like it looks like again, once the Saturn period starts, it will potentially get worse with the spouse. Because Jupiter and Moon are well placed, and that's what we're currently running. However, this debilitated Saturn in the eighth house is aspecting both the Moon and Jupiter. So even though we're not currently running Moon and Jupiter, there's still like a Saturnian influence here. And Saturn's like delays and obstacles, anxieties, doubts, depression, skepticism, all of that stuff most people aren't super happy about. And that's the thing is, that's something to watch as we go through these subcharts, is that how often Saturn is influencing Moon and or Jupiter. Okay, so even though we're not running Saturn yet, Saturn is still indirectly affecting Jupiter and Moon quite a bit. And I have actually at the end like counted up how many times Saturn is aspecting these planets, or it's the lord of the house that they're in, and it's pretty astounding. Okay, so this Jupiter Moon Saturn business is pretty deep again for this person or this period in time, even before we run Saturn, essentially. Okay. But let's look at it. Excuse me, hold on. Okay, so sorry, I talk so much. I don't know. I keep trying to drink and stay hydrated. Still hard on my voice. Anyway, so this first chart, the Namansha D9 for spouse and partnerships, Saturn's not well placed. It's debilitated, so it's aspecting Sun, Moon and Jupiter. So already from that, difficulties with family because of Saturn, debilitated Saturn's aspect in the second house, fifth house, 10th house. So family, children, work, and it's on the moon, so emotions. Um, yeah, and also friends is a problem as well because Mars is debilitated in the 11th house. So, and again, we have this dual opposing influence on the moon. We have this massively debilitated Saturn and Jupiter here. Jupiter's retrograde, that'll give it some strength. But Saturn, I would say, is a big dip here. Yeah. And then, yeah, and then also there's a parivartana between K2 and Saturn. So what that means is we're going to have Saturn, this debilitated Saturn energy, even more influential over the chart, which is wild. So, yeah, it's like really tough times, I think. The spouse is having, potentially the native is having with the spouse. Yeah, not easy time here. The Drake and a D3 for siblings. So we have a Vargotama Lugna, meaning that we have another Cancer rising chart here. It means this chart's important. And again, in the siblings area, usually we look at the D3 and I mean the third house. So in the third house in the natal chart, we had K2 there, which is a malefic planet, and the lord of the third house is Mercury, and Mercury's in a negative house. So yeah, it's some challenges there for sure. And then even sometimes we do look at the 11th house as well for older siblings, and we had that Jupiter there, but then the Spasra Venus was, just sunk by the Swa Saturn in the eighth house. So either way, third house and 11th house not looking too spiffy. And you can see here, Moon and Jupiter are not well placed, so there are going to be issues with siblings here. Jupiter and Moon are in the third and eighth house in the subchart, subdivisional chart. And those two places in a subchart are related to change and endings. So yeah, there's something significant going on there. Saturn's exalted and it's aspecting the lugna. So that's going to be pretty strong drag once we get to Saturn. And let's see, Mars is debilitated again. That also keeps happening, so keep track of that. And then we have a K2 Mercury parivartana. So already this is pretty interesting. Like in the B9 K2 Saturn parivartana, now a K2 Mercury parivartana. K2 Saturn Mercury, those are all planets of like distance and kind of isolation. So that's already a lot of, again, we were seeing in the chart, basically all of the relationship has like family, second house family, inner circle, third house siblings, fourth house mom, fifth house children, seventh house spouse, what else? Ninth house dad, 11th house clubs, group, society. Like a lot of relationships going on. Yeah. Again, if this is a person chronically through their life. But in this particular moment, many of it as well. So, and we're seeing that in the subdivisional charts. So this exalted Saturn's aspecting the lugna, that'll bring it down. Mars debilitated again, and then again that K2 Mercury parivartana. So you can also see this like tendency to isolate or feel distant from, people. Yeah. So, all right. So what else? Next charts. So on this slide, we have the Septamsha D7 for children and the Dwadashamsha D12 for parents and grandparents. These are also quite challenged. So it looks pretty good initially with the children because all the grahas are well placed, they're in positive signs, and Jupiter's in its own sign, and that sounds great. However, when we look at the subcharts and we have Jupiter at the top of the chart in the Lugna for the D7, Jupiter's what we call the Jnati Karaka. That's like the planet representing the person that the chart also represents. This is similar to Karko Baba Nakshatra that we would see in the main chart. But this is actually an indication that there are problems with children. Whether it's having children or just, children in general, like maybe health-wise, mental, emotional, that sort of thing. So, yeah, Mercury's debilitated, but it is Bunga in the uh, top here. But you'll see that there's like 5 dual planets, like Mercury, Jupiter, Sun, Saturn, Moon, all in dual signs. So there's a lot of confusion back and forth. And as we saw in the main chart, we had this massive Jupiter in Rahu, and this massive Saturn in Purva Bhadrapada, both influencing the fifth house of children. And I remember I said that it was like going to be a roller coaster. We're seeing that again here. Yeah. So Mars is exalted, here, but again, directly across him is debilitation sign. So Mars is still affecting, there's some Mars and Cancer debilitation energy in this chart, even though it is technically exalted. And, Saturn here is influencing 5 different planets. That's a major drag that Saturn has, especially because even though Saturn is, in a positive house, Saturn is what Saturn is, and you still have to bring it back to the main chart, which was Swa in the 8th house. Yeah. So, and then the second house here, we have K2, a Swa K2, and then Mars is Swa there, this explosive second house of speech as well as family. Yeah, so not a lot of stability here with the D7 children. Then the Dwadashamsha D12 for parents and grandparents. Jupiter and Moon are not well placed, but Jupiter's Swa, Moon's exalted, so that's helpful. And again, they're in the third and eighth house, so changes and endings, so an unstable time. Saturn's exalted on the top, conservative family probably, a strict family maybe. But again, that's gonna influence the whole chart, with parents, again, Saturn's not a happy, warm and fuzzy planet, right? I mean, Saturn's cold, distant, delays, obstacles, sadness, potentially. Uh, we have a Mars in, through aspect in the second house with KT with Sun, the second house. That's a lot of fire energy, explosive family assets, not a lot of stability there. Um, Sun and Mars are in parivartana, so that means you're going to have the two fire planets all over the place. So strict, edgy conflicts going on here. The other thing, this is a phenomenon we just look at in the D12 specifically, but we look for Sun and Moon potentially on the Rahu Ketu with Rahu or Ketu. Sun and Moon represent father and mother respectively, and Rahu and Ketu are maternal and paternal grandparents, but Rahu and Ketu also indicate, again, are the north and south nodes of the moon, and they bring a lot of chaotic, unusual, hidden, unexpected energy. And so when we have either Sun or Moon with Ketu or Rahu, that can indicate like problems with father if it's Sun, or if it's Moon, problems with mother. But we have both here. So difficulty with both parents. I mean, so you can see like even in the subdivisional charts, like the relationship situation is not looking great for this particular person. Yeah. Then we look at education and career on this slide. Sadamsha D24 education, and then the Dashamsha D10 for career. So the education one, we'll look at this. I mean, you have what, 7 out of 9 planets in negative houses. And we saw like the 4th house, right, was the disposer of Venus, suppressed in the 8th house with Saturn, and then a debilitated Mars aspecting there. So yeah, so again, again, if this was a person, they probably would be more like a blue collar worker potentially, but entrepreneur type. Yeah. So, and that's the thing is all the grahas, Jupiter, Moon, Saturn, all are not well placed. Saturn's at least swa, but yeah, this is a pretty strong negative education chart here. And the other thing is Saturn went to the 12th house, and it's the Lagnatia. It's the ruling planet for the subchart. So maybe somebody would go abroad potentially. The other thing is Saturn's aspecting Moon. So that's going to bring Moon down. Then Dashamsha D10 for career. There's this kind of odd triangle going on. So Saturn is, again, influencing Jupiter and Moon, bringing them down, even when it's not active. Yeah, so let's see. All the grahas are well placed, but, they all have multiple malefics on them. Like Saturn has Mars and Sun, and then Mars has Saturn and Sun, and Jupiter has Saturn and Mars. But you can see that there's a lot of Mars and Saturn influence here. So again, this is somebody who's probably more of a blue collar worker type, like engineering, manufacturing, but also some leadership as well, I would say, because Sun and Mars are involved as well. So that leadership may be the like, being an entrepreneur. Yeah, so doing their craft, but then doing their own business too, making their own business out of it. Yeah. Those, and then here we have the Rudamsha D11 for income and the Chaturchamsha D4 for assets. So here, Moon is not well placed. Jupiter's disposer is strong, but the thing is, in the subcharts, Jupiter's the sole enemy of Venus, so there's some contentious energy there. And Saturn is Lugnatia again, so that'll bring stress when that's not active. So the Jupiter period should be decent for income, but again, there's going to be a fight involved there. Saturn will bring stress because it's on the Moon and on Mercury, the two main planets, and Saturn is on the 11th house, so Saturn may slow down income. Then Chaturchamsha D4 for assets. Moon is not well placed. Sorry, but it's aspected by its disposer Jupiter. That should protect a little bit. Saturn is exalted in the Lugna again. So Saturn again is having a major influence on all these subcharts as well. Mars is debilitated again, but it is Bunga because Jupiter is aspecting it, the exaltation planet. So that'll bring Mars up a little bit. Mars is also aspecting the Lugna. So, the assets here are, I would say, very tangible. Probably property. Like Saturn and Mars are the two Bhumi Karakas, the two land and property Karakas. So, those are right at the top. But I would say that there's instabilities and delays here because the second house lord is this debilitated Mars, and the 11th house is lord is Sun, and Sun has gone to the 12th house of losses and expenditures. So, yeah. But again, especially we're looking at probably property land assets here. Okay, so on this slide we have health. The Tajik Shashtam should do 6 acute issues, then the Tajik Ashtamam should do 8 for chronic issues, then the Bomb should do 27 for strength and resilience. So at the top, Jupiter's not well placed and it's debilitated, so that's not going to be a great overall Mahadasha main planetary period. And Jupiter's in a sign of Saturn. So again, even when Saturn's not active, it's going to drag Jupiter down. But there is some transformation going on here acutely. Then the D8, Saturn's not well placed. And it's in the 12th house of loss and isolation. Jupiter's supported a bit because it's with a Swa dispositor, but again, we've got Venus with it, soul enemy. And who else? Yeah, and then Mars is debilitated in Cancer again because Mars is aspecting Cancer in the second house. So again, like second house issues, right? Assets, family, inner circle. Yeah. And then we've got Moon on the Rahu, kind of with Rahu and Ketu in the fourth house of home. So again, for this native, it just, home, whether internally or externally, is not a very happy, stable place, it looks like, unfortunately. But, again, if we're looking at it as a transit charts, then energies will be shifting soon. So, yeah, so then the Bombsha D27, strength and resilience, all the grahas are well placed, but Jupiter and Mars are in parivartana, so that's going to bring Jupiter to the 8th house. And Saturn and Venus are in parivartana, so Saturn's going to go to the 6th house. So, again, that's going to bring these planetary energies, it's going to bring more of the negative influence when those planets are running. And so, yeah, troubles, change, work, and home, because Jupiter's in the 4th house, Saturn's in the 10th. And Saturn's aspecting Jupiter again. So you'll see that again over and over again. I have the count, I think, on the next slide, so we can take a look at the numbers, actually. But the last two charts before I do get into the, counting, accounting for the planets, we have the Panchamsha D5 for innate spirituality and the Vimshamsha D20 for formal worship here. Sorry, so the D5, all grahas are well placed. Saturn is aspecting Jupiter again and Moon. So especially because we're talking about spirituality here, I would say that there could be a crisis of faith, and Jupiter is the lord of the 5th house and the 8th house. So it's also going to bring more of that Saturnian energy to the top of the mind intellect and the deep psychology. That's pretty heavy energy. Mars is debilitated again in the 12th house. So again, we're seeing issues here with home and family. So I think if this person has some sort of practice on their own, they may be even wondering if it's of any use because it's pretty challenged here. And again, it looks like there's a crisis of faith. And then we're kind of seeing the same thing, unfortunately, with the Vimshamsha D20, formal worship. Jupiter and Saturn not well placed. Saturn's aspecting Jupiter again. So Jupiter is with Venus, a soul enemy. So there's some change or end coming, but again, conflicts. And Jupiter is aspecting Moon and Mercury, so there may be some optimism here. Saturn is swan, the sixth house. So, that's acute issues and enemies. It's not great to have Saturn in the sixth house, but at least it's swa, so it might show some indications of improvement, but it's still Saturn is going to be slow. And the other thing is Saturn is aspecting the eighth house where it's debilitated. So again, there's a lot of stress, and in this moment, it may be like this, again, crisis of faith, or what do they call it? Dark night of the soul. Yeah, dark night of the soul, where it's just like that's what happens when you go through that. Even if you're pretty steady in your spiritual or religious practices, sometimes it just feels like there's nothing coming out of it. Like you don't get the peace or relief you normally get, and you sort of start to wonder, like, why am I even doing this? So, but sometimes that can also be like the dark before the dawn, or like it can be an indication of spiritual ascension. So, and again, from the native chart, it does look like in short amount of time there will be some improvement, as a transit chart. But you can see, like, yeah, again, if this is a native chart, the person's struggling, and in this moment in time, uh, people are struggling. Yeah. So then I have down here this accounting I talked about. So when I looked at the main chart and the subdivisional chart, so there's 14 total charts I've looked at. So Saturn's influence on Jupiter, 8 out of 14. That's a lot. Okay, it's the majority of them. Jupiter in a negative house, 5 out of 14. That's a big chunk. Saturn in a negative house, 5 out of 14. That's a big chunk. And then here we go. Saturn on the moon, 7 out of 14, half of them. Rahu and Ketu on the moon, 5 out of 14. Okay, because all these things are going to destabilize the moon, which again is the ruling planet for the main chart. Moon in a negative house, 6 out of 14. That's almost half. So out of the total 14 charts, when moon is with Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, or negative house, 11 out of 14. Almost all of them. That's a lot of challenge to the moon, the mind, the emotions. This is an intense, serious struggle. Yeah. And Jupiter on the moon, so the other way, 9 out of 14. So that sounds good, but again, overwhelmingly harsher influence on the mind. And again, at best, a duality, like a roller coaster. Like there are going to be moments of optimism, um, and there are going to be moments of, spiritual clarity or whatever, but then there's going to be a lot of drag. And then, in addition, Mars debilitated in Cancer, either directly or through aspect or parivartana or whatever, is 8 out of 14. Yeah, and so again, we're seeing that basically the uh, main chart really deeply influencing, this person or moment in time. And again, if you've been watching, like for the last couple months now, what's like shocking to me is I think it started a couple months ago. I did one either new or full moon, and the first one was like a lot of Saturn on Mercury. Then the next moon video I did, it was a lot of Saturn on Moon. Then the last one was a lot of Saturn on Venus, and now we're getting like a lot of Saturn on, well, Jupiter and the Moon. So Saturn, like this is like I think Saturn's like final kick, in terms of like delivering its last bits of, frankly negative or really intense karma, as it's sitting in Saturn in Aquarius before it transits to its next house, next position at the end of March. So, it's going to be an intense time, and that's what we're seeing here in this particular moment. All right, so, not easy breezy, but hopefully maybe some insights or understanding about what's going on here. And yeah, so all right. So as always, thanks for stopping by, listening to one of my talks. As always, I appreciate you and all the support you give me, my work, and the channel. Whether it's liking videos or subscribing or listening and posting comments. Some of you have posted some really lovely comments that have really touched my heart. So I appreciate that. Some people send in donations. So all the different ways that are important to you, I acknowledge all of that. And I really appreciate it. So thank you. Um, Again, all my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are my concepts playlist. They can be found there. If you want to see more famous birth charts, check out my birth chart archive list 2024 video for a list of all the charts I've analyzed on the channel. Famous charts I've analyzed on the channel. I do offer individual birth chart readings. If that's interesting to you, you can email heartlightafter@yahoo.com for more info on that. I do those live on Zoom, on Skype as a recorded video, and I offer gift certificates if you'd like to give somebody a reading. I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine where I discuss Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, yoga, homeopathy, and naturopathic medicine, so other paradigms of natural medicine. And the name of that channel is Nature Source Care. Okay, so as always, I hope you found this talk helpful, useful, and interesting to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. All right, so until the next one, take good care. Namaste.